Ask an elder in medieval Europe not to wander past the tree line after dark. Ask a grandmother in old Arabia not to linger too long near an unmarked grave in the desert. Ask a traveler in Norse country not to cross a bridge alone at dusk, or a villager in the Himalayas not to stray too far into the white silence above the tree line. None of these people ever spoke to one another. They never traded stories, never compared warnings. And yet, across centuries and continents, they built almost the exact same handful of fears into flesh and claws and glowing eyes. Not because the world is full of monsters, because the world is full of the same few things worth being afraid of, and every culture eventually found its own shape to put on that fear. Start with the fear closest to home, the idea that the beast isn't out there at all, it's inside you. European legend held that an ordinary person, through a curse, dark magic, or the bite of one already changed, could lose themselves entirely under a full moon. Claws lengthening, senses sharpening, the human mind buried beneath something that answered to instinct alone. The werewolf never needed a forest or a mountain to hide in, it only needed a person who couldn't always control what they became. Then there's a hunger that simply refuses to end, and three very different monsters were built to carry it. French folklore gave the world the ogre, a towering figure of raw strength living deep in the woods or behind castle walls, remembered less for cruelty in general than for one specific, chilling appetite aimed at the smallest and most vulnerable. Arabian tradition produced the ghoul, a creature that haunted graveyards and open desert, said to disturb the recently buried and lure the unwary traveler into isolation before striking. And centuries later, out of Haitian folklore, came a very different kind of hunger. The zombie, once believed to be a person raised from death by a sorcerer's will and stripped of their own mind, later reimagined into the shambling, endlessly multiplying horde familiar today. What connects an ogre in a French fairy tale to a Haitian zombie isn't culture. It's the same nightmare wearing three different faces, something that consumes and does not stop. Some monsters exist to answer a stranger question, not what happens if you're eaten, but what happens if you disturb something you shouldn't. Deep in a labyrinth built specifically to contain it, Greek legend placed the Minotaur, part man and part bull, a punishment given shape and locked away until a hero named Theseus, armed with nothing more than courage and a single thread to find his way back out, finally faced it down. Egypt told a quieter version of the same warning. The dead were carefully preserved for a life beyond this one, and later legend claimed that some of them didn't rest easy if that preparation was disturbed, waking wrapped in centuries-old bandages, carrying memory, intelligence, and ancient magic intact to defend what had been theirs. Both stories share a single warning underneath the specifics. Some thresholds are not meant to be crossed. Other fears never needed a moral at all. They only needed a blank space on the map. High in the Himalayas, an ape-like figure covered in thick fur was said to move through terrain few humans could survive in. The Yeti, never fully documented, never fully disproven, simply always one ridge further than anyone had explored. North America produced its own version in Bigfoot, an enormous, hair-covered figure known more through footprints and distant sightings than any confirmed encounter, and notably one of the rare legendary giants rarely described as violent at all. Scandinavia filled its own wild places with trolls, some towering, some nearly human-sized, said to dwell inside mountains or beneath bridges, vulnerable to sunlight but not always as slow or simple as legend liked to claim. None of these three needed teeth or hunger to be frightening, they only needed distance. The plain fact that somewhere just past what any given culture had mapped, something might still be watching. And then, there are the monsters that reveal something less comfortable, that raw size and strength were never actually the winning hand. In Greek myth, the Cyclopes were giants marked by a single eye, sometimes gifted blacksmiths forging weapons for the gods, sometimes savage figures on remote shores, but the most famous of them, Polyphemus, wasn't overcome by force. Odysseus beat him with cunning. Centuries later, European folklore imagined small, sharp-toothed goblins who survived not through muscle, but through trickery, theft, and mischief, thriving in ruins and abandoned mines precisely because no one expected something so small to be dangerous. And in a very different register, the orc emerged from older folklore into modern fantasy as almost the opposite lesson. A warrior race whose danger came not from any one fighter's skill, but from relentless numbers and aggression working together. Between a one-eyed giant outsmarted by a single clever man, and a horde that wins by sheer weight of numbers. These legends quietly argue the same point from two directions, that strength alone was never the whole story. The most unsettling monsters, though, are the ones that don't announce themselves at all. The vampire, though versions of a life-draining undead appear across many cultures, took its most famous modern shape in Eastern Europe: intelligent, calculating, capable of incredible speed and strength, able to move among the living completely unnoticed until sunlight, certain plants, sacred symbols, or a stake through the heart forced it into the open. The witch carried a similar unease closer to home, an ordinary neighbor who might be a respected healer wielding herbs and old knowledge, or, in the fear-driven logic of the European witch trials, might be accused of summoning storms and curses with no real evidence at all. Thousands of innocent lives lost to that same suspicion. Arabian tradition imagined the jinn as beings formed from smokeless fire, granted free will to choose good or evil just as humans are, living unseen alongside them, and occasionally taking human or animal shape, a tradition far larger and stranger than the single genie most people picture today. And Japanese folklore gave rise to the oni, red or blue-skinned giants, with horns and iron clubs, feared for the destruction they could bring, yet often given a second act in the stories that followed, some becoming protectors rather than the threats they began as. Line every one of these 16 legends up side by side, and the costumes fall away fast: a beast hiding in an ordinary person, a hunger with no bottom, a price paid for disturbing what should have been left alone, a wilderness too vast to fully map, a strength that loses to cleverness or numbers, a danger that hides in plain sight until it chooses to be seen. Different names, different continents, the same handful of fears passed down, generation after generation, until each culture gave its version of that fear a face, a name, and a story worth remembering. Maybe that's the real reason these legends have outlasted the people who first told them, because the fears underneath were never really about monsters at all. They were about us, what we might become, what we can't stop wanting, what we shouldn't disturb, what waits beyond what we know, and who might be standing closer than we think. If any of these 16 struck a nerve, stay with us a while longer, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which fear you think still shapes the stories we tell today. Because somewhere, another culture is still quietly giving that same fear a new name.